very much. Hello, everybody. My name is Stephen Daldry, and I'm the chairman of the Good Chance Theatre. Before I introduce Nizar Zuabi, who will talk a little bit about the walk, I just thought I'd give you a context of what the Good Chance Theatre actually is, for those of you who don't know. Good Chance Theatre started in the great refugee migrant crisis of 2015. It came out of a group of colleagues deciding to engage with the crisis that was unfolding on the border with France and the UK in Calais, where a ramshackle migrant stroke refugee camp was beginning to be built and emerge. Two of that group, Joe Robertson and Joe Murphy, collectively known as the Joes, went down to bear witness and decided that the best response was to build a theatre. Now, you may ask, what on earth is a theatre doing in a refugee camp? And indeed, many people did ask that. The question was simply answered by putting this geometric dome up. It was a dome that we found in Hebden Bridge. It was driven down to Calais. And almost on the first night it was put up in the camp, the question was answered as a variety and a huge number of people gathered in the dome for the first time to celebrate the very act of being alive in what was already one of the most distressing and disturbing places in Europe. The dome survived for a year before the French authorities finally destroyed it. And during that time, it became very much a town hall within the camp. A town hall where, yes, artistic endeavors were made, were created, were followed, were pursued in all its different forms. But it was also a town hall in the sense it was a place that people could gather. It was a place that was not affiliated to any one particular nationality or religion, where it was a free space, if you like, run by the Joes, who went there for, I think, just a few weeks and stayed 8 months at the end of the whole journey. And it became a center of creativity. Now, again, back to this question of what is a theatre doing in a refugee camp, perhaps the answer is, well, what is a theatre in the first place? There are many answers to that question. Perhaps one of the interesting answers came from one of the people that turned up in that camp. His name is Majid Adin. He was a refugee from Iran who was an artist in his home country, who ended up stuck in Calais. He asked that question, what on earth is a theatre doing in this refugee camp? He started drawing. He was an artist. He started drawing, just drawings of his journey so far. Eventually, he made the journey over to the United Kingdom and became a celebrated artist in the United Kingdom, where he made animated stories about the journey and using the work he'd made actually in the dome, Good Chance Dome in Calais. These animated stories we helped him with, and actually he put them together to make a pitch for Elton John's Rocket Man music video. Elton had never actually made a video. And Majid won the competition to create the Rocket Man official video to Elton John's song, which is now being viewed by 70 million people worldwide. He actually also has his own very successful artist and animation studio in the United Kingdom. He's one example of people who found the dome a place where they could start to piece together or understand the journeys that they've made, and to understand or to question the simple question of, what is my life now? If your story is interrupted, if you are in, if you like, as a refugee, suspended, how do you start piecing together the past? What is your present? And can you possibly imagine the future? Whatever art form you can choose, people came together to share stories and start piecing together what their hopes and their dreams and indeed their past was, if you like, to create a narrative. The dome itself then traveled, when the camp was destroyed, to Paris, to various areas around Paris, starting on the periphery near La Chapelle, but moving down into the center of Paris with the support of the mayor of Paris and the different Ministry of Culture in France. The dome has appeared in the United Kingdom, bringing communities together. And just before the pandemic, we were actually working on the Mexican-US border in Tijuana to create a center there for refugees, where again, they could come and try to understand the simple expression of artistic creativity within possibly appalling circumstances. The walk is our next major project. And the walk is a journey of a little girl, who is walking. Her name is Amal. She is walking from the Turkish-Syrian border. She's walking across Turkey. She then crosses the Aegean. She walks across Greece. She then travels across right the way up Italy, moving into France, Germany, Switzerland, Belgium, back into France. She crosses the Channel and then moves through the south coast, through Canterbury up to London, eventually completing her journey with the help of the Manchester International Festival of Theatre, obviously in Manchester. To talk about the walk, well, the first thing to say about the walk is she is a little girl. She's an unaccompanied minor that we're walking with. The extraordinary thing about Little Amal, unlike many other little unaccompanied minors, obviously, she is in fact a puppet. She's a 3.5-meter puppet, and we will be walking with her from July this year. The question, well, the first person I'd like to introduce is the artistic director of the walk, who's here, Nizar Zuabi, who's speaking to us from Jaffa. Nizar is a Palestinian writer and theatre maker, and has intimate experience his whole life, and for indeed his whole past, working with refugees. The first question I've got, I know your parents themselves, or your grandparents, were refugees. Nizar, on a personal note, do you describe yourself as a refugee, or how would you describe yourself?
Well, I'm a Palestinian from my father's side. I'm a Jew from my mother's side. So I think between these two narratives, the word refugee pops up very often. So I'm not a refugee because I live in my land, but maybe my land is no longer my land. So I am partly a refugee. So it's a complicated question. I think what does it mean to be a refugee is a very complicated question, because it's to do with a moment in time. It's not an ongoing status. It's a condition. It's a condition created by circumstances, but then you're not a refugee anymore and you're something else. And I think that's what the walk is really about. This transitional phase between somebody that's at home to somebody who's in a different territory. He's not necessarily a refugee for the rest of his life. What is he then? Is he a former refugee? Is he a rehabilitated refugee? So it's a big question. Obviously, where I come from, in my country, this is the idea of being a refugee has been the power that shaped this country. You know, refugees from Europe, fleeing World War II, created Israel on the expense, on the lands of Palestinians who became themselves refugees. And because of my complicated family heritage, I have Holocaust survivors on one side and the victims of that same odyssey on the other side. So it's a very complicated question.
Little Amal is a young unaccompanied minor who is looking for her mother. She is on a journey, and that's what we're doing. We're walking, and we're walking with a little girl, a little unaccompanied girl, who is looking for her mother, who eventually, in some form, she comes to some relationship with in the United Kingdom. But what is for those that don't know, can you just tell me a little bit more about the walk? What is it? Is it a protest? Is it a march? Is it a festival? What is the walk?
I think the best way to describe this is an 8,000 kilometer long rolling festival of shared humanity, of hope. This little girl, who's a beautiful puppet created by the legendary Handspring Puppet Company, is leading us through 65 different cities and communities. And in each community, we are creating bespoke events with the city and the community and our partners. We're almost 200 partners now and counting, are a mix of the best artistic institutions, but also civic society, religious figures, humanitarian organizations. So when we are creating an event in one of the cities that we walk across, we are creating content and creating events and art with many different walks of life. Obviously, the refugee communities in these cities are very active in the design of the events. And to all these unbelievable partners that we have across the route, the premise, the beginning of the conversation was very simple, is this 9-year-old is crossing through your town, how would you like to welcome her? And over the last year, where we have been Zooming our partners endlessly, it's quite unbelievable the amount of generosity and creativity that's coming back to this proposition, because people have come up with beautiful projects of how to welcome her or how to celebrate her. It's very important. It was very important for me that this walk is not about misery. She's not, she's a very strong character somehow. I think that was like you are when you're a 9-year-old that's crossing a continent alone. But it's also about potential. It's about human potential. And this girl is full of culture, and she's full of different smells and aesthetics of a different place. And she's learning things constantly as she walks. So she's an evolving human being. And we will only accompany a short phase in her life. That's how we're thinking of this. We're walking with her for 3 months out of a very long, successful life that will come after that. So we're her guardians for a moment.
We're just showing you some images now of Little Amal. This is a prototype that we created with the Handspring Theatre Company. You may know them. They created many productions, perhaps their most famous being Warhorse. And here she is in just outside Cape Town, where we were walking with her just to experiment with the early prototypes. We also, just a couple of images about to come up, we brought her to London, where she was learning to dance with different communities. And we walked her on the South Bank as well. There she is, and she's obviously very worried about the coronavirus there. She is, just tell us a little bit about the practicalities, Nizar, of let's just talk about what actually this puppet is, because she's made by Handspring. How many teams of people, how big an operation is Little Amal herself? How many people are there who are animating this puppet?
So from the beginning, the ask from Handspring was to create something that is low techy, which means that she's manageable and very human. She is bigger than life. And she needs four puppeteers all the time. One is inside her on very tall stilts and carries her body on his shoulders. And then there's 2 puppeteers doing the hand motion and another puppeteer guarding her back. So the rest of the puppeteers are safe. And they need to think as a team. And on the road, obviously, we'll have 3 different teams that will rotate, so they can kind of keep up with the events and the hardships of the journey.
It's quite a big operation, in other words. And I know Adrian and Basil, who run the Handspring Theatre Company, talk about the notion of empathy. What is empathy with a puppet? Can you talk a little bit about why? I mean, again, I know because we've been on these experiments ourselves, but why does she have such an extraordinary reaction? Why do people project onto her? Why do they feel for her? Why do they want to talk to her? Why is she such a potent symbol? Why is a puppet such a potent symbol?
I think that the first thing is the puppet needs a leap of faith. In order for her to be alive, you need to believe she's alive. But from the moment that you do this leap of faith into giving her life, she becomes, she evokes a lot of things inside a spectator, because she's not real, but by doing this leap of faith, you just made her real. So you're invested in her immediately, or else she's just an object. And obviously, part of the brilliance of Handspring is that they created a figure that is very relatable, and you immediately feel for her. So this act where you kind of project something on an animate object and make it real and make it alive means you're already invested. There's also something, I think the puppeteers moving Amal need a lot of empathy, because they need to create an interaction with people. So they're projecting themselves on the puppet as well. So it's an interaction between 2 projections. if you like, which is a very subtle thing, but when it happens, when it's real, it's absolutely fantastic to see. It's, you know, in our workshops, you see people relate to our children, but also adults.
One of the things that I was most surprised about because Little Amal we decided that Little Amal wouldn't speak, but when she sometimes whispers things to people and you don't understand what it is, if you ask people, they'll tell you what she's saying. They will, what's she saying, do you think? And they will tell you exactly, they'll tell you all sorts of information about it. It'll be different from different people, but they sort of know where she's come from and where she's going. I know that you spent many, many months now, years even, talking to a variety of different groups across Europe. And some of these groups are various, as you say, they're faith groups, they're church groups, there's school, civic groups, and for want of a better way of describing it, theatre or artistic groups. But the scale of events changes, doesn't it? Some are very small and some are really very large scale events. Can you answer the question, give me an idea of what actually is going to happen. So she's going to start walking. She's walking. What happens? When she arrives somewhere, I know they're very different, but give us a flavor of what sort of activities we've got planned.
We've got 65 cities, and in some cities we have more than one event, but I'll try and give you kind of cherry picks. In Izmir, we're working with the Yarın Cooperative, which is a huge network for traditional dance in Turkey, and they will gather hundreds of their dancers to teach Amal a Zaybek dance. In Tarsus, which is the city where St. Paul was born, she's going to be given a gift that will be taken by her to St. Paul's Cathedral. In Athens, which is her first big capital city, she walks into the city, she's a bit lost and afraid. She ties a red yarn and starts walking, and then is joined by a dance company, Kinetiras Dance Company, that also does the same thing, and suddenly there's a river of red yarn. And then by mass participation, hundreds of people will join her in this march through the center of Athens until she reaches Central Square, and then she meets a Minotaur, which is created by a puppetry company in Greece. And they befriend each other, and he shows her the rest of the city. So Athens is about conquering fear of the unknown. In Rome, after a long day of walking the streets of Rome, she goes to sleep in Piazza Farnese. And as she's falling asleep, she starts seeing dreams. And these dreams are actually paintings by a Syrian artist, brilliant artist called Tamam Azzam, who depicts the bombarded houses of Syria. After the war, he does these beautiful, beautiful, very poignant paintings, and they're projected on the walls of the piazza. So she wakes into this nightmare, but it's also an open air installation. In Paris, we are creating a big refugee camp, and each of these big white tents will have a soundscape from one of the countries that refugees come from. So you will walk around the camp and you can hear a radio in Arabic, or a hushed conversation between two lovers, a lullaby of a mother to a child. And they will also have shadow art projected on the walls by some quite amazing artists that are creating this with us. In Marseille, we have it's one of they're not small, I call them precise. One of our precise events is Amir Nizar, who's a gorgeous, gorgeous visual artist. Chatting with me, he told me about the fact that when he was young, he loved to spend time in his uncle's tailor shop in Damascus, because that was a place where there were sounds and smells of different places, because he'd bring haute couture from Paris and kind of copy the models and create the Messian version of that. But then he became a refugee, Ammar, and while walking this route, his best friend became his jacket. So the jacket became his sense of identity, his sense of pride, and the thing that gave him warmth. And Ammar wants to hand sew a jacket for Amal and give it to her under the mirrors in the Marseille port. I don't know but there's a gorgeous statue in the Marseille Port of Mirrors. So he's going to create an installation where he tailors the jacket on her and tells her the story of his uncle's shop in Damascus. If I hop over the English Channel and get to London, so in London she becomes 10 and celebrates a huge party. And in Manchester, in our big finale, she meets the memory of her mom. And the community of Manchester welcomes her to stay, and that's her big finale. So that's pretty much a scope of some of our events.
Thank you for giving us the thumbnail of just some of the events. And I should add, there are many, many, many events. We are encouraging people to join us physically, but join us also online, and you can watch her, you can interact with her. And of course, all the obvious elements to this event, you can imagine what we're doing, from seeing through her eyes to interactive relationships for schools, and indeed joining us on the journey itself when you can, as well as these big tentpole events throughout Europe and indeed across the United Kingdom. We're running out of time. Daisy's going to tell me that she's going to put up on the chat a website which will tell you all about the walk, what you can do, how you can support it, how you can follow her, and how you can interact with her. But thank you so much, Nizar, for joining us today from Jaffa. And good luck with your vaccination program over there. That's going very well. I know Rosie really wants to talk about that. But just saying how great it is to see you, and I'll see you very soon. But Daisy, thank you. That's the walk from us.